Welcome to our global audience. I'm Colin Christie. I'm the Executive Director of Global Chamber here in Metro Manila, Philippines. We have a great room full of people here this morning. We're also broadcasting live from the Global Chamber headquarters at Skysong in Scottsdale, Arizona, as well as from the great state of Ohio. With one of our speakers I'll introduce momentarily. And I believe we also have a live audience in Metro Phoenix. So again, thank you very much to everyone. Welcome to our event on to grow and refine your leadership in the global community. My name again is Colin Christie, Executive Director of Global Chamber Manila. I will move right along to introducing our speakers. So first of all, we have Dwaine Canova joining us at the Global Chamber headquarters in Arizona. Dwaine is an accomplished international entrepreneur, holds an MBA degree from the Wharton School in Pennsylvania, and is going to be speaking to us about leadership development and has a background in leveraging information to improve customer acquisition, retention, and service. But most of all, I've gotten to know Dwaine, and he's just an all-around good guy. Speaking of good guys, another good friend, actually, John is in Ohio, but has graciously let us use his corporate headquarters here in Manila for today's event. John is the president of TeleDevelopment Services. He's a pioneer in providing consulting services and solutions to the world's biggest companies, helping them achieve their outsourcing and offshoring objectives for a quarter of a century. John, I don't think you're that old. He's in charge of the overall direction of TeleDevelopment, initiates partnerships, generates new business, and shapes the company culture. He's a recipient of numerous industry awards, including 2 ATA Tele Awards for Excellence, the Telemarketing Award for Customer Contact Excellence from Customer Interface magazine. Not only is John an all-around great guy, but his team is phenomenal too, and taking really good care of us this morning. And then I just also want to acknowledge the presence in the background today. He'll be answering questions online is Doug Brunke, the global CEO and founder of Global Chamber. So I see we have a good number of you already online and in person. So with that, and with those introductions, let me introduce you. Let me just turn it over, I guess, to Dwaine. So Dwaine, it's great to have you here, and take it away.
Colin, thank you very much. What a great introduction, and it's fun to have everyone here. And as you can see, what we're going to talk about today is how to grow and refine your global leadership. And our sponsors here, of course, Global Chamber, and of course John's company, TeleDevelopment, and then the company that I'm a part of called Zenity Leadership. And so that's just introducing us and the title. And next slide. It's really going to revolve around this thought, how do you define, and then once defined, how do you continue to refine your leadership? And being able to do that becomes a foundation for having it be scalable. And one of the things that we'll mention maybe a couple of times is think of this as an example. Think of someone who is really into health and fitness. Well, if they're into health and fitness, many of them have things that they do. There are tasks that they do to build that and do that. But most of them who take it to the next level also are real students of what they do. And as being students, they create concepts, they create principles, and so that's what we're going to be about here today. That's a little introduction to the theme. And so our process is just to take you to a little bit along with this, and then as we get through this, you'll see here and continue, we really want you to ask questions, make comments, and be a part of what we're doing. And those of you who are in the webinar environment, just send chat, send thoughts, and we want comments as well as questions. So add to what we're saying here, and just help make this a part of it here.
Yeah, Dwaine, to underscore that, for those of you maybe new to this platform, you should see that you have the ability to pose your questions. There should be a button for you to to pose your questions, and feel free to do that right away and throughout. We'll be answering those not only over the air, but we'll also be answering in the chat as we can. So just underscore that point. Thank you, Dwaine. Go ahead.
And just sort of 3 points about our outline. One, we're just going to give you a little introduction to this material, and then we're going to spend quite a bit of time with having John share his case study where he explains how he's been applying this in his company and the difference it's made, and then we'll go from there and talk a little more about some of the other issues around this. But throughout, we want your questions, and we have plenty of time in this session for your questions and comments. So please join us there with that. Thank you. So the issue here is around clarifying your leadership. So how you speak it, how you write it, how you implement it, and just again, kind of having your background there, the thought of this personal fitness person, how avid they are about being able to talk about it, how they write about it, how they implement it, and how they understand it. Next slide. Let's just begin with this premise about leadership, is that in companies, it almost doesn't matter the size, and no matter what your role in the company, even if you are the CEO of a 200 million or more company, in every bit of leadership, there's the managing piece as well as the leading piece. And in our discussion today, with managing, we're talking about focusing on present things and doing things right. And with leading, we're talking about doing future things and making sure that we're doing the right things for the future and for the present. Next slide. So in reality, every day you speak, act, and implement how you lead and manage. But in order to get to that next level, next part there, to get to that new reality of understanding as being a student, it's really time to reflect, document, and refine, and to do it in a very deliberate way, as opposed to just doing things without always putting them into a good context. Next slide. And so documenting really helps this. And you can see here, and I won't read those to you, but you can just see that getting to understanding, being able to express how you lead and manage really helps you understand you better. It also helps everyone around you understand better, and you're able to share and to communicate more effectively. And we know that in most organizations, almost everyone feels there's an opportunity to improve communicating. And this becomes a major contribution to helping create that improved communicating in organizations. And so leadership is about establishing an environment, and it's in this environment that we really want people to flourish. And part of the flourishing is helping them understand, making it easier for them to collaborate, and also by the documenting, we begin to know who has contributed and how they're contributing to the progress and the growth of a company. Next slide. So in thinking of you defining yours, your way of leadership, it should include these 4 things: purpose, you'll get clarity, and what we're going to spend a little bit more time now is talking about what we mean by framework and what we mean by environment. Next slide. So here's what a framework is. Anyone who's leading and managing a full organization or part of an organization, first of all, we have to make sure that our managing team is connected and aligned. We have to then make sure that we're working on the right strategic initiatives, we're prioritizing them correctly, and we're implementing them in concert with one another. And we'll spend a little more time about customers, but in a sense what we're talking about here is every part of the organization really has, and we need to have them know exactly how what they do impacts the customers and the customer's experience. So if we ask most organizations, are you customer focused? They say yes. But if we ask what is your document that would prove that, and how does that get explained to everyone? That isn't always in place. And so we want to talk about how we would do that so that each part of the organization is leveraging what the other part is doing. And one of the long-term principles of leadership is if we're going to manage something, we need to measure it. And so measuring and managing becomes something that's really important. They usually show up in reports. And so we have to make sure that how we create reports is done in a consistent way. And it's done in a way so that we understand that the reports are actually creating the results and creating the behaviors that we really want in the organization. Next slide. When we think about environment, usually the word revolves around culture. And so culture is important. But there are other dimensions to an organization that are around these 4 points. There's just content. There's an organization's information, how it's collected, how it's used, and also lexicon. We have to be able to use our keywords in a common and developed way. And so we have to get real discipline around this issue of keywords. And then business rules, concepts and principles. And then how this all interacts and works together is really what gives us the opportunity to create the harmony that we all seek in our organizations. Next slide. So when we talk about the interactions in organizations, it's just impossible to have an elaborate set of do's and don'ts to cover every option of things that could be done. And so what we also have to have in place and have people understand are the concepts and principles of how we lead and manage, so that as we get into certain things where there isn't an established do or don't, we can rely upon an understanding of our concepts and our principles, and that can guide our behaviors. And the more we understand our concepts and principles, the easier it is to shape the interactions and our do's and don'ts. So we've used the word concept a lot. And so what we want to do with that, give a definition of that here for right now. And you can read those 3 points, of course, but it's a general idea. It applies broadly, and it usually is a high-level perspective. And so being able to understand the concepts and the applications becomes a key piece in being able to have an organization that can adapt and grow and evolve together. Next slide. When we talk about a principle, we're talking about, at a minimum, these 3 features, which is it has to be a truth, it has to apply broadly, and then it can become a foundation in what is our system. Because you'll hear us as we move along here get toward this system of leadership. Having a system of leadership, we can have a system for manufacturing, and we can have a system for sales, but we also need to have our system for leadership. So in creating this document, we can talk about it, speak about it, but beginning to build clarity about what we're doing requires a document. And so as we think about these 8 points, the documenting begins with, imagine each one of us just writing a word or 2 or a sentence about each one of these. So as an example, and we're not going to go into elaborate detail here on each one of these, but when we talk about a philosophy, what is your concept about leadership? What is your philosophy? What are the principles in your philosophy? And when you think about what we do, it isn't just what we do, it's the concepts and principles behind what we do. And as we serve markets, we don't just list the names of the markets, we list why we're in those markets. What is key about those markets? What are the things that we need to know? And what are the principles that we have in place that helps us provide leadership in those markets? And you can see as we go along down here, I'll jump down to the customer focused. We have to have everyone customer focused at all times. And part of doing that is having documents that have concepts and principles around what that means for us as an organization. If we could just go to a website here, because getting together a document like that, I want to take you to a website where you can begin to complete your document. And you'll see there's a book here, How You Lead and Manage. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But you can see for philosophy here, you could just come here and you could begin. What are the key words that you have for your philosophy? What are the themes for your philosophy about leadership? What would be your leadership statement if you could only make 1 or 2 sentences about leadership? And then you can see under the second title here, the what we do, you can see that there are a number of things that we describe here. And so we begin to build this document, and then the markets we serve, and you can see that next markets we serve, there are sections there where you can begin to input your information. And so you can come here, this is all free, just come here and use this, start building your document, put it in place, and over a period of time, you will have your document. And so if we have a leadership team of 6 people, and each of the 6 people are now here using this document to begin this particular piece, you can begin to itemize each one of these. And of course, we think that by having this kind of document, as we work in all of the global markets, whether we're in Asia, whether we're in Europe, whether we're in the US, whatever part of the world we are, that by having this kind of a document in place, it enhances our ability to adjust and be a part of the global leadership. And so you can see that this is a form, and there are all kinds of ideas and thoughts about global leadership. But what we want to have is a place to begin documenting that, so that we don't just get busy doing things, but we also reflect and think about what we're doing. And so we can begin to document what we need. And by having this document, it makes us easier to adapt and adjust to work in different cultures and in different countries. So that's kind of how all that works, to help us be able to create how we would adjust our leadership. In fact, there would be adjustments as we go from one country to the other. If we're doing something in Europe, or if we go to Asia, we would do something a little differently. And that's how we would begin to keep track of that. And here's how you know that this is working in your organization, is if we have everyone on our teams that are really asking these questions throughout the day. Are we really doing the right things? Are we doing things right? And is what I'm doing leveraging what the others are doing? So the first one is about leadership. The second one is about management. And the leverage is about helping to accelerate the quality and the harmony of the interactions between the various parts. So that's what we mean by knowing that it's working. And what that creates is these 4 items, as well as others. And ultimately, the stress and the harmony begin to be the big payoffs that really spreads throughout all of the organization. So we do get better numbers, and we do have a more productive environment. But this issue of growing stress and creating the harmony is one of the things that's really significant in most organizations today. Next slide. To help put this in perspective here for a moment, because this is for growing organizations, evolving organizations, is to understand these stages of leading and managing and the focus of leadership in these various stages. In the early stages, or when companies are smaller, There may only be one or two leaders, and the role of the leaders may actually be more like a supervisor would be in a larger company. It's really about getting the tasks done, being a part of all the tasks. As the organization grows, now the role of leadership is more as a manager. We've got one or two or three or five individuals that we manage, and we focus on processes. And as we go from operations level to an organization level, we still have to have the operations. So this is really additive. But if we're going to really build and grow a larger organization, we have to get to the place where we have this framework. And that's kind of what we have over here in the enterprise level. And here is where we have to begin thinking about things conceptually and in terms of principles. And that's how the leadership dimension changes. It isn't just giving everyone a group of things to do, but now to create, what are our concepts of why we're doing this? How are we doing this? How do we make sure that our managing team is connected and aligned? And how do we present that and guide that through principles and concepts? And so,
as we pause to the next slide, we just have a quick question on, does less stress create better performance? Maybe we could take that here before we go to the case study.
I'm sorry?
The question, we have an audience question that says, does less stress create better performance? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it's a terrific question. Many times with stress, what stress creates first, is people being asked to do something or being guided to do something differently. In a stressful environment, the mind actually gets scattered and goes in a number of directions. It's harder for them to focus. And also stress is an energy drainer, and it becomes a distraction. So on the surface, people can look calm, cool, and collected, but if they're operating under stress, in fact, behind that, their mind is going in many different directions. So that's how the productivity gets impacted by the reduction of stress. And of course, as we all know, there are probably 24 spectacular books written on exactly that topic who would give a much more complete answer for that.
And then one other question, again, before we move to John's case study, how can leadership be measured, or can it?
Well, one of the ways to measure leadership is through the traditional financial statements, if you will. But there are a whole lot of operating measurements that come in place as well. And so we have, for example, back to that same website, there are these 3 assessment tools. And just taking those 3 assessment tools will help give someone some insight. And then measuring the tools 6 months later, you'll be able to see, where you go back and do the same measurements, you'll be able to see improvement in the reduction of stress, and the improvement in the increase in harmony, and also the increase in outcomes.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so then I guess we can proceed to the case study with John. Is that where we're going next, Dwaine?
Yes, sir. That'd be great.
Thanks, Colin. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is John Kaplan. Thanks for the opportunity to share some time with you. Before I share some of the case study with you in terms of our experiences, Cesar, if you wouldn't mind just going back to this slide, thank you so much. Before I got involved in Zenity, the framework of Zenity, I also first spent some time reading this book, and which really got me energized to dig deeper. And in this book happened to be this slide. And this slide really struck home for me. As a global organization, generally, there's 2 things that I choose not to get involved in. One is HR within a specific country, because I'm not a subject matter expert on human resources, so I leave that up to my HR team. And the other is day-to-day finances. Of course, I get involved in weekly and monthly reviews. I get involved in business planning, but from a day-to-day perspective, those are two specific areas that I try to leave up to my cultural and subject matter experts in countries. But this particular slide really had huge impact on me because, well, I always strive to be on the far right-hand side. It's easy to get pulled back into the day-to-day tasks, tactics, that from time to time, critical issues come up. You feel like a firefighter, and you know you've got a team in place that should be willfully and capable of managing these issues. But for any host of reasons, I oftentimes get dragged back into the operational, into some of the organizational issues. And whereas at my level and my CEO's level or COO's level, we really want to stay right side focused so we can grow the organization. So what I found, and what you've already heard on several occasions this morning or through the session, is what Zenity has allowed us to do is to start to create and make better use of this framework. And it's from that perspective that I'd like to chat what some of our experience has been thus far. And let me just share with you that just as our businesses are viral, we're still at the early stage of this journey. And so the journey is ongoing. The journey needs to be ongoing. We've got still a long way to go. But at this particular time, it's easy to realize what having a structured process in place in terms of tools and framework is enabled our organization to do, which I think would be not different than perhaps your organization. So in terms of the case study, what Zenity challenges you to do at the very onset is really to ask yourself, and ask your team for that matter, your management team, three key questions. Number one, it allows you to internalize as a leader, first and foremost, how strong is your team? How strong is the team that you have in place? You know, it gives you insight into their thinking. It gives you, by following a structure, it gives you some insight into how they prioritize what's important to them and to the organization. It allows us to understand how well aligned we are. And the reason why we do this is because this isn't a one and done thing. This is a process that we follow on a weekly basis. And as you start to communicate with more frequency, then it's a lot easier to, number one, obviously keep a handle on current situations, but more, as importantly, evaluate, again, the thinking of your leadership team, and number two, understand how integrated are they from a collaboration perspective. Very, very important. The other things that you learn, or the second key question would be, how are things today? And when we say how are things today, we mean, you know, what's hot, what's critical this week. The Zenity process allows us to keep an active pulse on what's most in front of us from an important standpoint. What is the team focused on this week? So while I want to stay focused at the enterprise level and others at the organizational level, the process itself allows us to keep a pulse on movement throughout the organization at all levels. And so you have a strong sense of who's doing what, and what are the stated expectations that they've identified. And I'll get a little bit deeper into that in just a moment, because what Zenity does is, just to fast forward for just a moment, there's a set of tools. And the tools allow us to have multiple groups. One group would be a senior leadership team. It would be the group that I'd be involved in. There would then be departmental groups. And so the manager of that SBU or that business unit or that function is the leader of that group, of which I have the ability to monitor in others. So we can pick and choose who's going to be in what group. But what happens is we make a commitment. We make a commitment that ideally, doesn't happen 100% of the time, but ideally by the end of day Friday, we list up in the Zenity tool, what are the things that we need to focus on for the following week? And by doing that, it does a couple of things. Number one, it states commitment. Number two, it allows us to monitor what was stated the previous weeks and where we're at in terms of milestones, what still are open issues that we need to focus on either individually or collectively from one group to the next. And so the other thing it does is by stating what we want to focus on for the following week, it either frees up thinking over the weekend so we can relax a little bit more, knowing that we've already finished our task in terms of clarity for what we want to focus on next week, or it illuminates that focus over the weekend in terms of what we want to get done. So by using the Zenity tool to document what it is that we wanted to complete in the tasks that we've done, it then allows us to have really brief Monday morning quarterback meetings to say, okay, these are the focuses. This is a less than 30-minute meeting. And then it allows us to have interaction throughout the week because we know what other teams are working on and where we can also list up some contributions or interactions that we need to be engaged in to get that particular task across the finish line. So this all gets down to some levels of documentation. And as Dwaine mentioned earlier about philosophy and creating concepts, I mean, the reality is most all of us from a business perspective have created our mission statements, our guiding principles. We've talked about documenting and illustrated what our core values are. But the reality is by going through these exercises periodically, number one, it allows us to have a renewed view on what might be important to the organization today as the organization evolves, what might be important to a changing customer base and customer needs because they evolve. So what was written as our mission statements and corporate philosophies maybe a year or two ago, because we do revisit those, they're constantly changing. And so, it forces us as an aggregate to make sure that we have a shared vision and that we're all on the same page. So these exercises I found to be particularly helpful and refreshing. And it's done periodically because, let's face it, from time to time, some of our team members are changing as well. So it's good to get them involved and get their thoughts.
John, it's Colin here. Can I just jump in kind of on this theme with a couple audience questions?
Yeah.
You're talking a lot about putting these things in place to measure. I think one of the great questions was, besides performance measurements, how do we know that we're on track? How do you, and we can ask, obviously, Dwaine to weigh in on some of these questions after, but from your perspective, having been through this process, besides actual performance measures, how do you know you're on track?
Well, and I mean this in a positive way. Using Zenity on a regular basis, weekly basis, allows you to be judged, if you will, by a jury of your peers. So we want to make sure that we're all carrying our weight and doing the things that we need to do. And secondly, we want to make sure that as we discuss these priorities and the tasks that people are committing to, that they're the right things. So we talk about getting the right things done. So we also can use this platform to mutually discuss what we believe are the things that we should be focused on. So then we can, number one, have a consensus. And then number two, we can monitor that progress from week to week.
Yeah, so the ability to keep track. Yeah, and then also I'll throw this one at you, and I'll also ask Dwaine to weigh in. But I know you, of course, have been here in the Philippines and back with the U.S. customer base for many, many years. Done a lot of international business. So on the theme here of global leadership, is global leadership the same as regional or local leadership, or are there additional elements needed when you're operating globally? What has been your experience?
I've had companies and businesses in very distinctly different types of cultures. I've had a business in Tokyo for a number of years. Got a business in the Dominican Republic, the Philippines, and the U.S. And I would say that you have to understand the cultural differences, and leadership. While leadership is leadership, it has to be synthesized, and you have to be able to acknowledge the idiomatic differences from one culture to the next and be sensitive to those. But principles in themselves, I believe, remain the same.
Yeah, and maybe Dwaine, we can have you weigh in on this. I think this is it's an excellent question. It's a vital question, right? In terms of, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about tools. What's been your experience also advising people around the globe in terms of global versus regional versus sort of local leadership?
In a general sense about leadership, you're asking just a general comment about that, or?
Yeah, in other words, what is there some elements that you of leadership and of the process that without regards to if you're operating locally or regional business versus operating a global business, what other factors to consider when you're trying to become a leader in a global sense?
Well, yes, I think as you go global, you have to be able to adapt to different cultures. And I think it requires an even greater understanding of your conceptual perspective, and also the principles that you use, and then the ability to document those. So in almost all countries, cultures, one of the things that we hear is that, when we do our surveys, if we talk to the principal of most organizations or parts of an organization, and we ask them to rate things on a 0 to 10 scale that are about this issue of communicating, what we're finding is that many times the principal will give the organization a rating of 7 or 8 on communicating. But if we go to the people who report to that particular person, their ratings on communicating might be 4 or 5. So there's a difference in perception about communicating. And part of it is around the issue of the principal being really clear. And because in fact, they might share something in month 1, and month 4 around the same topic, they might present it a very different way. And that's perceived as being confusing. Now, in fact, if you get that individual and the principal into a situation where we get them to really describe that item, and we ask them to write it down, they can get to greater clarity, so that in their presentation they're significantly more consistent. So consistency of expression comes not from saying the same thing every time, but from having it documented and being able to in fact explain how it's migrated and how it's changed, and then a 2 or 3 page document that explains how I lead and manage is a long step toward having your team understand how you lead and manage.
Yeah, excellent. I think it's such a powerful point you're making there in terms of not only having clarity of documentation for your team and communicating it, but then having that feedback loop, correct? Because my experience too, like John, I'm doing business in multiple countries. Oftentimes the way the message is received is very culturally dependent. And without that feedback, you might think, okay, I've clearly communicated, I put the information out, but my US team, my Philippine team, my Indonesia team, or my European team might receive it in a different way. John, I'm sure that's been your experience.
Yeah, and I think, that message needs to be filtered differently as you work your way down different levels within the organization. So hopefully at the most senior level across the globe, you have a certain level of DNA that you can speak at a certain level that needs to be synthesized and more carefully communicated in terms of what you say and how you say it as you move down the organization.
Yeah, and we have a question from Jim. He says, can you give an example of a conceptual view? Dwaine, maybe you can tackle that one.
Yes, when we talk about a concept, what we're talking about is really having a general presentation of maybe the things that we do on an ongoing basis. Let me go back to the personal fitness example, because that seems to be the easiest for people to understand. In personal fitness, I can have very specific things that I do in exercise and very specific things that I do with diet. But behind those exercise is the concept. Why am I doing this particular exercise? And why am I doing this particular sequence of exercises? Why am I eating this? And so it's the why behind the specifics of what I do is one of the ways to understand what we mean by concept. And then a principle, to add to that, a principle are the truths that we establish and adhere to as we develop an expression of our concepts. Is that too much?
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. We've got great questions coming in, so I'm just going to stay with that for a moment. I know Q&A is also at the end, but I think this is great. We're getting a lot of audience interaction. Excellent question here from Carmela. It says, what advice would you give to an organization made up of multicultural team members who are mostly home-based? How can you keep them focused at all times and ensure they do the thing right without a manager or leader physically present that they're reporting to?
Well, one of the things would be for each of those folks to create their own how you lead and manage document. If we had each of those and they're posted and people have access to them and share them with one another, so we now know how people feel and how they define these different aspects of leadership. And we would then have, I'm going to say quarterly meetings for the moment. We have quarterly meetings where people share their various documents and they talk about them and they talk about with one another. And so they learn together at the conceptual level so that when we get to the application level, we have greater consistency of understanding between one another. And of course, the other thing is within groups like that is to build some discipline around creating our lexicon. When we use a particular word in our group, this word means this specifically. And so we begin to define our lexicon. And that becomes a great advantage to that as well. And so those are the two key things that I would suggest with a group, is to really spend time looking at how each other person would describe themselves and the things that they do.
Yeah, excellent. So I think what's coming across to me, a common thread, of course, here is that leadership is actually a process, right? And there's a framework that you can follow. There are tools that you can use. It's about also documenting. Oftentimes, that's a challenge for all of us. I would like to go back to John. I know, John, I didn't mean to preempt your
No.
I know you had a couple other points to make.
Well,
maybe you could speak a little bit to that idea.
Sure, and then I'll wrap up on my end. But I think it's a great question, because today, more than ever, talent is everywhere, and you don't want to confine talent to just one singular location. So there's a lot of virtual senior leadership positions globally, and so being able to communicate, being able to get them on the same page is become a new and increased challenge, right? So I think being able to pose, use virtual messaging, have allocated time for groups to get together, even though it's virtual, to still work on the process. That's the one beautiful thing about the tool. The tool is web-based. So just because you're not in a centralized location doesn't mean that we can't all collaborate together. So particularly in this type of instant where we're talking about senior leadership working globally in different locations, this at least provides the conduit to record and communicate amongst one another, since we're not all in the same room together. But just getting back for just a moment, some of the value and the benefits that we've seen and will continue to see is, number one, we do have this common platform for communicating. So that's essential. Number two, it allows us to manage and lead at all levels, both operational as well as organizational. It makes the team work and think in a more harmonious way. So we are able to leverage the strengths of others when we're working on a particular item. Others can chime in and are encouraged to do so. The tools themselves lead to a certain level of elements of visibility and accountability, which is critical. Because we're stating our intentions of what we want to focus on, and we're monitoring, back to the question earlier, how do we know if we're doing the right things right and we're making headway? This Zenity is all about having visibility of what's important to you and what you're working on, and then the accountability that's associated with that, so we have positive reinforcement throughout the process as well. And just a couple last things. I find it to be time efficient as a roadmap, and it provides clarity within the organization. Now, all of this we've also found isn't, of course, without its challenges. A couple of challenges. Number one, like all new programs, adoption took a while. It's still taking some time to get everybody adopted to a new tool, new way of thinking, and getting buy-in and commitment to use this on a regular basis. At the very beginning, there was a lot of confusion because we have other tools and other communication devices. So adoption and some resistance to change was something that we had to overcome. And then it's really got to be driven both top down and bottom up, from a management perspective and a user perspective, to make it work. At the end of the day, the thing I like most about the process, the tool, is again, it puts everything into a framework for managing and for leading.
Yes.
Excellent. So Dwaine, great testimonial there from John about not only the process but the tool. In the few minutes we have here, I'll go back to you to wrap up your key points, and we'll see if we have additional questions.
Well, I really did appreciate John's insights, and one of the things that he brought to mind, and just additional clarity for me, is that what we're talking about is refinement, the ongoing refinement process. And we know that many times organizations are run essentially from budgets. Here are the numbers we're supposed to get. And then we look at them on different time periods. Are we meeting these numbers? Are we not meeting these numbers? And then when we have a discussion about did we get the numbers or did we not get the numbers, many times what we hear as explanations are people explaining things that occurred weeks ago or even months ago as to why we did or didn't make our numbers. And sometimes that's not so accurate if we haven't been collecting the information and which really represent the dynamics along the way. And so here's an example for us to think about. It's World Cup time. So we've had the World Cup now on any place you can go, it's World Cup time. So now think of this as an illustration to help us understand a really important dynamic. Let's assume that the coaches for any of the country's teams, if the coaches met with the team an hour before game time, and the coach gets there, here's this, here's that, you guys got to do this, And the coach makes it real clear that if you're going to beat this team, you have to score 2 goals. That's all it takes is 2 goals. And so we've paid you a lot of money. You're all brilliant. You're well trained. You're marvelous. So here's what we'd like for you to do. We want you to make two goals. And me and the other coaches, we're actually going to go have dinner. And while we're having dinner, you guys make sure you get the 2 goals. And then the coaches go off and have dinner. That isn't how it's done. And so part of the philosophy of leading organizations where we just hold people accountable for numbers, if we don't also engage in the dynamics of what's going on while we're creating those numbers, we miss the opportunity to train, develop, participate, understand, learn, and grow with all of the people creating all of the activities required for us to accomplish numbers. And so one of the things that we, of course, include with this how you lead and manage is that you probably need a coach. And the coach doesn't need to be hovering every day. You know, the coaches don't run out for every play and make something happen, but the coaches are there and they understand through the documentation and the tools that are designed to collect the leadership information. They collect through that dynamic, they begin to understand. And so over the course of a month, for example, the coach might have 3 hours in 2 or 3 different sessions or 4 sessions with the principal, and they might also have a couple of hours with each of the other 5 people who are on the team, and they're talking about the dynamics of things while they're occurring. And we're getting little short sound bites of each of the team members recording comments, making suggestions, interacting with the other people on the team, so that we literally have the dynamics that people can be engaged with. And it begins with documenting how you lead and manage, because now we begin to understand that if we'll take sound bites, we're not talking about writing a huge document. We're talking about a document that's very manageable, 1, 2, or 3 pages.
Right. And just to jump in here, we've got a great question to Jim. I think you've really actually been addressing this point, which is, do we start the process at the senior team level? You talked a little bit about the coach. Let me just broaden his question only to, where do you start the process? But I know that you have materials available. I'd like to point people to your book. You also have your website tools and resources for people who, are interested to, beyond this event today, to follow this process. How do they get started? How do they get started with your materials, for example? Where do they find it? And where do they start? John also spoke a little bit to, the onboarding process. So can you kind of address that broadly? Where do people go, after this webinar to get started, and how do they get this process working with your team?
Well, I think we have a slide that shows a picture of the book, but also if you come to our website and you come to our website and you just contact us through there, and if you'll request it, we'll actually send you a book. That's part of how we can get you started. So we will send you a book. The other thing is that we would ask that you just kind of do a little scouring, but looking around. What I want you to also do is to understand that this is not something that you just plug and play. This isn't like an app that you download and in 4 minutes you can use the app. We're talking about putting in place a whole new way of thinking and acting and working with our whole leadership thing. So it requires a process. And so if you'll connect with us, we'll connect with you. We'll get one of our certified coaches to have a conversation with you. And so it begins a bit of a process. So we know that this is something that are for those organizations that are saying, listen, we want to refine how we do things. We want to improve what we're doing by 2, 3, 4, 5% in this area. We're not talking about overhaul stuff. We're talking about this ongoing refinement piece. And so you can come here to the site and you can see the contact us piece. You'd go there and we'll connect with you and help you get started through the process. And that's probably the easiest way to get started at this point.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we see it up on the screen. It's Zinity.com, right? ZYNITY.com. I think your book, How to Lead and Manage, is also available on Amazon. I'll put that plug out there. So we have a couple other questions I think we can slide in here. Jim asks, how much additional time will it take in a week?
Yeah.
It should, we get it set up to get you started, that it really should, as you begin this process, it'll take each person between 20 and 40 minutes a week extra to get started with this. And then what you'll find is over time, you'll be a little more engaged with that. And you'll find that the tools help reduce a lot of other interaction and requirements. You get more specific. So you might spend an hour with the site, but the site is going to save you 3 to 4 hours a week in making you more efficient with your communicating with your peers and with your the folks who are your direct reports.
And if I may, looking at it from a more classical perspective, I also saw the question, is it best to get started with the senior leadership team? I think absolutely yes. So, from my experience, I was the sponsor and participant, but I also nominated somebody to be the project owner to make sure that everybody had the logins, everybody had communication in terms of when to participate and how. So I think having a sponsor and having project owner was important. The other question I saw is, if you've identified a weak team member along the way, how do you bring them up? Well, I think by having an active process like this, quite frankly, it allows you to do both. See the cream that rises to the top in terms of being able to get inside people's heads and understand their thinking and see what greatness that they're bringing to the party. But it also allows you, on the flip side, to understand where you need to help bring people along because maybe their clarity and their vision isn't exactly where you'd like it to be. So
John, I think you're speaking to this. Vince asked, what are the ways that leaders can reinforce the use of the tool, considering it might take some time to get used to it? So I think you're kind of speaking to that, but directly to that point, how do you, with your team, have you reinforced the use of the tool?
Yeah, I mean, it took and continues to take a couple of months that on a weekly basis that we have to reiterate the importance of it. We have to talk about how people are using it. Are they using it effectively? Are they stating the right types of things? Are we using it with the right types of intentions and purposes? So it's a refinement process along the way, and it could easily take 90 days to get your leadership to where you want it to be, so you can then start to filter it down into teams.
Excellent. So I'd like to just really compliment and thank our audience. We have actually quite a number of questions. Those that we haven't been able to get to in the hour, we'll try to respond to you electronically. I've kept track of the questions here. I'd like to thank you very much, John. Hope it's been a great day there in Ohio. Thanks for your inputs and your insights. Of course, Dwaine, just outstanding information, really appreciate it. Again, I direct people to your website, to the book, phenomenal tool. From here in Manila, for those of you in the audience, thanks so much. We've had a really terrific online audience as well as in person. I direct you to information about Global Chamber. You can go to www.globalchamber.org. For those here in the Philippines, it's manila.globalchamber.org, or in Arizona, phoenix.globalchamber.org. So a number of different ways to find out information about us. If you're not yet a member, of course, we encourage you to check into that. We really put on a lot of events like this, but we also really reduce your risk of growing globally, hard to say that, by making warm, trusted connections. So that's really what we're all about, is helping you be global and unstoppable. So I think we're right here at the top of the hour. Again, thank you so much, John, Dwaine, to the audience, to our fearless leader in Arizona, and behind the scenes, Doug Brunke as well, and Cesar, who's been helping us with the technical end. So thanks very much. Again, feel free to still post your questions online. We'll answer them electronically.